We continue now with part 2 of my conversation with Narada Michael Walden on Tommy Bolin.
And then, so I'm just going to zoom so that you understand with Mahavishnu how I got to Tommy. Tommy, I would start meeting now up at Nat Weiss's office, who was Mahavishnu's manager. And I said, I know you. You're from that band called Zephyr. We all knew about Zephyr in Michigan. That's how bad he was. I mean, there's lots of rock bands. But he was so badass with Zephyr that I knew about him. And then, of course, he started making his name with Billy Cobham and Spectrum coming up.
With Ken Scott Engineering.
Yes. And then, so then it came time, after our last Mahavishnu Orchestra album, Inner Worlds, after I do the Wired thing with Jeff Beck, and I do a thing with a few other, jazz rock fusion worlds hot with all kind of folks happening. Then I was asked in New York Tommy said, come down and cut a jam at Jimmy's place again. Here I'm back setting up again in the same spot I did the second album with Mahavishnu Orchestra to do a song called Marching Powder. And we cut Marching Powder live. And here's Jan Hammer, who I never had played with in a studio before. Here he is. Here's Sammy Figueroa on congas. Here's Stanley Sheldon, I believe, was on bass. Here's David Sanborn on live alto sax. Here's Tommy, rare form. Here's, I think, on engineering, might have been Dennis Mackay.
Dennis Mackay, yep.
So here we all are in a live setting. We learn the song, we cut it. I think maybe we cut it just twice. But they ended up using the first version, though. But anyway, it was on fire. Tommy was happy, everybody was happy. And it was so much happiness, which I resounded to, like the same with Mahavishnu. He was happy that Tommy said, well, I might go on a tour. And would you want to come play with me? I said, I'd love to play with you. That's how good he was. And even in fact, when I went to go play some recordings with Weather Report, Joe Zalmo asked me would I join Weather Report and bring a bass player. I said, well, I have a bass player for you. Let's bring in Jaco Pastorius. We flew in Jaco Pastorius and we did a piece called Cannonball. After I had recorded the song called Black Market, we did Cannonball with Jaco. And Jaco's trying to learn the parts and adding all the extra parts of the song. And Joe stops him and says, don't play that shit on my song. And Jaco's like, okay. And that was the formation of how Joe taught Jaco to be Jaco. Just play what's needed, not just because you can, because you can play everything. So then you listen to that song called Cannibal, you're hearing the rarefied beginning of Jaco with Weather Report. But in my heart of hearts, I told Joe I couldn't join because I was asked to join Tommy Bolin and tour with him. And that's how important Tommy Bolin was, who wasn't even that known yet, to tell Joe I couldn't join Weather Report to go with Tommy. And then Tommy's band became, we brought Norma Jean from my early bands on sax to sing. He brought the genius from Vanilla Fudge, Mark Stein,
yep,
who was brilliant with singing and playing. He brought from Stevie Wonder's band, Reggie McBride, to play bass.
So Tommy knew Reggie?
Yes, he did, because I didn't know Reggie before that. He brought Reggie. And then we met up in L.A. at the big SIR studios in L.A. And Tommy was smart. He gave us about a week or 10 days to learn everything, but just to kind of become camaraderie. Because Tommy wasn't always playing. He wanted to talk, kind of hang out a bit. His vibe wasn't like, no, his vibe was like, hey, let's just have an hour and just talk about stuff. Kind of let loose about things. But what it did for me, it was good because it gave me a chance to get my chops up for him and make a new sound, a new vibration for his band. And then we went out and played different shows, and we killed. It was a wonderful, wonderful band. And Tommy and I became really close friends, and he loved his girl at that time was Karen.
Yep.
And she was a big part of his heart.
Yep.
And she was there for everything. Like Yoko Ono. She was there for everything. And if we do a big rehearsal, a big thing, or a big show, then they would want to hang out. If we're in LA and we play, for example, a monumental show at the Roxy. I'll never forget it because up in their little box where people can sit would be George Duke and Billy Cobham staring down on us. I'll never forget it. For all musicians out there, you know what I'm talking about. There comes a time in your life when it's like fire, trial by fire. You got to really bring it. Whatever you got to bring it. When Billy Cobham watches you play and George Duke watches you play, you got to bring it. So, and we did. We brought it. And after that show, Billy Cobham came backstage and he said, Michael, you're knocking the paint off them drums. I said, I am? He said, you're knocking the paint off them drums. And I shook his hand, and again, his hands were like babies, like skin. I said, how do you keep your hands like babies? Because now I'm like all open and like Muhammad Ali talking up. He said, I play on my fingertips. He said, give me your sticks. And then he showed me. Yeah, I play with these fingers back here. All my speed's coming from here. It's not my palms. I said, okay. So all these things are like new concepts for me to really learn that this rarefied air. Here's Tommy backstage now being glorified by Billy, by George, how brilliant you are and how we're so knocked out by your band and da-da-da-da-da. And Tommy's being really humble because he was humble. And people need to know that about him. He was a genius, but he was a humble genius too. He wasn't taking anything for granted. He wanted to play his best. He wanted to be his best. He was trying to be absolute best. But not long after that, as we all have in life, the issue of alcohol and not being able to control got the better of him. And I could kind of see it as we were doing more shows now. Maybe he was tired too, because we didn't rest very much. Where it culminated for us after playing Denver, which was a good show with his Faye was down there. What's the guy's Faye name? Barry Faye. We did a big show down there. Was it Ebbets Field?
Ebbets Field.
Big show in his hometown. And we also played a small dive. I mean, it wasn't really a dive, but it was like a small place. You walk down into it. Off the street, you walk down into it. Small stage, packed. We blew it out. It was incredible. But then after that, we went over to like New York, where I lived, my friends and all that. We played a place called the Bottom Line. Big show for us.
But you did in Roslyn. You did My Father's Place first.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Okay.
Right?
Yes. My Father's Place, of course. I think someone recorded that show. I hope they did.
Yep.
Anyway.
Yeah. It's a bootleg CD.
Okay. Well, Tommy I recall that being a good show. He was still able to control things. It wasn't until after that, we went to Bottom Line, that it got out of hand.
And I always thought New York and New Orleans are both kind of famous places for people, if they have habits like that, there's always all kinds of people that are going to come forth. And that was kind of my thought, that in doing My Father's Place, then you guys are in New York. And
yes.
all of a sudden he could score. And then
I wasn't thinking that way. I was just thinking it was a massive show for us in New York.
And he hadn't found what you had found in terms of the spiritual path.
That's right. That is absolutely true. I knew I would live or die if I didn't go the God route. Drug was predominant at that time.
Yeah.
And all the folks who we loved, beside the Mahavishnu who got into Guru, like Jimi Hendrix, who I wanted to play drums for in the 70s, died in 1970. Again, drug. All the things that we're not sure, but all the, messing in those worlds is danger. And what I was about to say when we got to the Bottom Line with Tommy, I knew it was trouble because there are two pillars on the stage. And Tommy had to actually lean back on the pillar so he wouldn't fall. Played very well, I actually have to say. It wasn't the playing that was suffering so much. It was just knowing that he was just out there as far as his body couldn't stand. Had to lean on that. And that's when I realized after that show, I knew it was not long. I'd have to kind of part.
Was it just one show, or was there 2 or 3 nights at the Bottom Line?
I only recall in my brain one. I recall in my brain one. One show at Bottom Line that was just going the wrong way.
And I always heard secondhand that his playing was somewhat impaired. And you're saying, you got to know, even Tommy's playing impaired is still genius playing. He was a great player. And why? Let's talk about that for a minute. Tommy had such deep blues roots. Yep.
Such love for Hendrix roots.
Yep. Such
love for the cats who really stretched it out roots. That he could use those roots at ease and be phenomenal. His brain worked in such a way that he was always creative. So he could take those roots and whoop you with it.
But he never sounded like any of those people, right?
No, as we do. We all do our own thing.
Right.
But you got to learn from them, from the cats before you. how it's done. What's brilliant about what's been done, and take that stuff, that rarefied air and that whipped cream on the top, and flip it your own way.
Yeah, and he had a grandfather who was a noted musically talented person.
Yeah.
So he had that DNA piece.
Okay.
And then his dad took him to see Elvis before he was 5 years old.
Yeah.
The only time Elvis ever went to Sioux City was 1956. The first major rock tour ever. Mm-hmm. And his dad took him, and they'd been watching Elvis on TV because he was on 13 times between 56 and 57. So they went there, and Dad was already going, "You're going to be Elvis."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you can see that because Tommy did have a lot of Elvis in him. Even his face shape, you know, Elvis, I think, has some Indian blood, some other kind of blood in there because he had high cheekbones like I got. Tommy had the same thing. Tommy had beautiful high cheekbones, you know, chiseled, beautiful face, long hair with his little feathers. Looked like an Indian / mix of whatever, but definitely had some other blood in there. You know.
Well, it was Syrian, actually Syrian and Swedish is what it was.
Yeah, okay. It's a big mix.
Yeah.
But beautiful, beautiful. And I always think those mixes of people make for a new strain of creativity, a new height of creativity.
Did you have relatives in your ancestor chain that were noted for their musical talent?
Yes, I do, but I didn't know about it. I found out about it later on.
Yeah.
You know,
then you had it.
Yeah, my dad wanted to be a drummer. He was not a drummer. He would carry his best friend's drums, you know, but he had the passion for the drum. And my mom's family are very sensitive. They were the ones to bought every record, knew all the music, every kind. If Cannonball Adderley put out a new jam, we heard it. If Nina Simone had just put out Live at Town Hall in the 50s, we'd had it. If Horace Silver, Six Pieces of Silver, Senior Blues came out, boom, we had it. So they really opened my eyes early to all kind of great music. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was the summer of '67. Tommy had been in all these rock and roll cover bands, right? Because that's where you could, and he played out all the time. And then Are You Experienced came out in August of '67. And and Johnny shared with me, his brother, that he had a short-lived band for about a month, and they did a few talent shows called Harlem's Children.
Yeah.
And it was Tommy and 3 black musicians from Sioux City, where he started playing Hendrix.
Yeah.
And Jimmy just taught him how to be free.
That's right.
That's what he heard from Jimmy.
Yeah.
Was, wait a minute, I can just do whatever I want. Mm-hmm. Versus, the way things tended to be back then, where you just,
Well, but see, you got to speak about. Tommy had the talent to do that.
Right.
Not everyone can do that.
Almost nobody.
Let's be straight about it. Tommy had the talent, God-given talent.
Yep.
To be able, like Jimi Hendrix, to do that, like John McLaughlin, like Carlos Santana, like Neil Young, so many of the cats who can go to that rarefied air. You gotta be disciplined enough to learn the game, learn the tree, and then you can get outside the tree. So it's really discipline.
Because Patrick Clifford worked for starting in '78, 2 years after Tommy passed. And Nat took him under his wing. He was 21. He had worked at the Bottom Line, and he always bragged on Tommy. But what he told me was that Nat had already attracted into his management company all the most brilliant, like Mahavishnu, and all these people were there, and that he found out about Tommy early on. Mm-hmm. Do you have any sense of that?
All I can tell you is I just know that, like I mentioned, I met Tommy up at Nat's office. So I knew Nat was in on what was going down to have him there. And then Tommy was talking about, making his own album and all that. So it was a big deal for Nat's label, Emporium Records.
Yep.
So he was signed to Nat's label.
I believe that was the first album Emperor released.
Well,
then he did Stanley and Jan and Lenny.
That's right.
I just heard an interview Tommy did in January of '76, where there was talk about a 3-gig deal in England that never happened, with all those acts as one group.
Yeah.
Tommy, Jan, Stanley, and Lenny. And in radio interview, he talked about how this was going to happen, and he was going to form his own band. But whatever, that never occurred.
Yeah. What I want to say is the genius of Billy Cobham. What I want to talk about is how Billy, at that time on the Spectrum album, was able to ignite Tommy.
Yep.
to a stratospheric high,
so to
that
speak.
we all back down to go, wow. People like Jeff Beck, all the people who we admire, all would go, wait a minute. What Billy has gotten into now, because of his work with Mahavishnu and whatever he's done now, and now writing his own compositions and featuring this little kid, Tommy Bolin, kind of just smacked everybody back. So I got to really say, Tommy was inspired by Billy and the opportunity Billy gave him with those compositions, the way Billy played. Because Billy was one of the few cats, really, who could play all the jazz stuff, improvise all the jazz stuff, but also, drum roll please, played the funk well. Go back and listen to an album called Dreams with Will Lee on bass and the Brecker Brothers. Cobham is mean in the funk. We don't talk about that too much. But because Billy could mix those worlds, he could lay it down, whereas Tommy had room to do all that bluesy stuff that he knew how to do and wipe that snot off his nose and make it sound like that. So you got to really talk about that period, because then Tommy kind of got the idea, okay, now I know where I should go for my own solo direction. And he did. And he brought me in, he brought other people in who he loved, but he had established something now on the map with Billy.
Well, Billy first saw Tommy when Zephyr played on a bill with Dreams.
There you go. That's it.
And everybody, like you said, everybody just noticed him instantly. It's like, wait a minute, what is this?
Yeah.
And then he got engaged. Tommy's hanging in New York 70, 71. And they did some demos. Jeremy Steig, Billy, Jan, and Tommy did a couple demos at Electric Lady. But because Jeremy was a little bit harder to grasp, I guess they presented it to Columbia and they passed.
Okay.
But Billy was already hip to Tommy.
Yeah. Well, you saw me interview Billy.
Oh.
You saw it. I was really wanting to ask Billy a question about Birds of Fire.
I know.
Because Birds of Fire is the second album with Mahavishnu Orchestra. And it's pivotal for all musicians, because not only was the first album out of this world, Mount Everest in a mounting flame, but Birds of Fire would be then rarefied air on top of that. How Cobham got into the double bass drums, the way he was playing in 9 on the song called Birds of Fire, and adding the accents and things he got into that were like, we had never heard before. So I was just kind of asking him about these. He said, well, let's talk about that. But first, let me tell you about this kid named Tommy Bolin. This 19-year-old kid. I was like, oh, okay.
Stop me in my track, because you were so excited to be interviewing Billy.
Absolutely.
And then he goes, stop.
Yeah.
Now we got to talk about Spectrum. We'll get back to Birds of Fire.
Yeah, we'll get back to that. Yeah.
And
it's true.
That just cracked me up. And that told me, that's our basic premise, which you've already validated, that he was a rare genius.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's why Billy, 45 years later, stops his podcast with you and goes, wait a minute, time to talk about Spectrum.
Yeah, I know.
45 years later.
Yeah, I know.
And just your expression is so priceless. You kind of go, okay, whatever you want, Billy. Go.
Yeah. That's right. Now I want to say a couple more things about Tommy, just because you want to know these type of things.
Yeah, you've covered almost 2/3 of my questions.
Okay, what I want to say is we spent a lot of quality time in the hotel rooms, after shows, talking about life. He was really in search now. On our touring, he would be in search of life and life's meanings, and he'd want to talk after shows in his bedroom. We would just take time to unwind, and the search of life. And this is where I'm really happy I could kind of tell him some things I may have learned from Guru and share those things with him, because he really wanted to hear those things. So he was very much inspired and aspiring to learn more about the secrets of life. He was very much that way. He was going even more and more that way. So I just wanted people to know that it was a tragic ending to his life, yes. But when he was with it, as we all know, he was very much on fire to still understand, what is it about life I need to hear about? Let's talk about it, Narada. Let's talk about it. Whoever wanted to talk about these things with him. And that would happen almost after every show in our hotel rooms. Karen would be there, and we just talk about life. Also in limousine cars. He was the person that turned me on to David Bowie. Of course I know about David Bowie. But he had such a rare love for Bowie. He would play Bowie's stuff in the limousines, but point out to me what he loved about Bowie, what he wanted me to know that I should be picking up on Bowie that he loved. So these type of things I would have with Tommy that I wouldn't have known about otherwise.
That's where the coloring in his hair came in.
Fine.
Because of what Bowie did back in 70, 71, where he was being androgynous and dyeing his hair. And that was the inspiration for it. So Tommy was so dialed into David back from 1970. And there's a hair shop called Crazy Horse Salon up in Boulder. And it was primarily women who went there.
Yes.
And Tommy would go there with Jeff Cook, his lyricist friend, and they would get colors put in their hair back when the band Energy was happening. And so it's interesting to hear about his dedication and love and devotion for David.
And there's a few friends I got to mention. We talked about it earlier, but I'm going to say it again. The Stanley Shelton guy, he was really a big part of this whole thing of Tommy's inner circle. Yep. Because I would notice that he would talk about Stan. Stan would show up every now and again. Stan would be, for example, now in the Marching Powder sessions. Without me even really knowing much about Stan, he would be the trusted guy to be brought in. You know what I mean?
Because
he played it well.
Yep, he was the bass player in Energy.
Yeah.
Because Kenny Passarelli was going to be the bass player. And Joe Walsh had moved to Boulder. He was doing his first solo album, and he needed a bass player. And Kenny was Tommy's bass player. And Tommy said, I've got just the guy for you. And then all of a sudden he needed another bass player. And he knew of Stan from back in Lawrence, Kansas.
Okay.
And Stan came out. And the first iteration of Energy was all instrumental. And I judge it was late 71. They were being the Mahavishnu Orchestra. This was the real inspiration for the first incarnation of Energy. And so they played Downstretch, one of Jan's songs that was on the Jeremy Steig Energy album. And the versions of that on YouTube, the live versions that we put out in the archives back in the 90s, it's just out there. And so I realized Tommy was doing Mahavishnu.
Yeah.
And
as we all did, because that was it. You know, we were all trying to aspire for that. So
and so Stanley was right there, and he could keep up with Tommy, and they became really tight that way. Because Stanley,
I realized how great Stan was on that session because I had never really played with him before. But the fact that he could hold down boot and doo doo doo, check it, a boot and didn't did it, a didn't didn't boot and didn't did it. I mean, no matter what we threw at him, which we threw a lot at him, he didn't budge.
Well, because
I'm impressed.
He had been in Tommy's. When Tommy left Zephyr, he just went for it. Yeah. And he did exactly what he wanted to do. Yeah. And there's all these 3-2 beer clubs in Colorado. Nobody wanted to book them because they didn't want to have a jazz fusion band playing there. Nobody would buy beer. Okay. And that was part of the struggle. But they went out. You know, they went out on a just. And so Stan was definitely somebody that Tommy trusted. And they became good friends.
And then I want to say, when I was touring with Jeff Beck through some place, I forget the town we were in, with Jason Rubello and our great bassist, Rhonda Smith, we met up with Johnny and Stan backstage.
And we had pictures.
That's what it was. Yep. And we took pictures with Tommy's artifacts and things with Johnny and Stan. And Jeff, who normally maybe wouldn't have done all that kind of thing, was very reverential. He loved Tommy. So he really went out of his way to give Johnny love, Stan love, and that whole photo session we were going for, to bring the love to that. He understood it.
I've spoken to Johnny about that.
Okay.
And he said, Jeff said, I've never talked about it. December 3rd, 1976. Wow. That's right. It's been something that he's carried. And that night, and he just started talking, and Johnny just sat there, and Jeff just did a monologue. And he had never had a chance to do that because of how much he loved him.
That's right.
There's more. So be on the lookout for part 3 of my conversation with Narada Michael Walden on Tommy Bolin.